Ethan Cole was a man who lived by schedules. His calendar was filled with meetings, conferences, and endless phone calls. Every hour of his day had a purpose. That morning had started no differently. A breakfast meeting with investors, a drive to the city, and then hours locked inside a glass-walled boardroom. But halfway through a presentation, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a reminder about his daughter Lily's afternoon nap time. He glanced at the screen and felt something unusual. He missed her. The thought of her small hands and bright smile tugged at him in a way that no business deal ever could, or reasons he couldn't fully explain. Ethan decided to leave early. The driver took him back to his large, quiet mansion on the edge of town. The rain had started, painting the windows with thin silver lines. Ethan stepped inside, expecting to hear the usual silence that filled the place during the day. But today, there was sound. A soft humming. A lullaby. He frowned. The regular nanny, Mrs. Harris, never sang. She was practical, efficient, and had worked for him since Lily was born. Ethan walked down the hallway toward the nursery, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The door was slightly open, and warm light spilled out. He pushed it open and stopped. A woman he had never seen before sat in the old wooden rocking chair by the window. She was holding Lily, feeding her with a bottle, moving gently back and forth as if they had known each other for years. The woman looked up and their eyes met. She didn't seem startled, but her expression held a quiet confidence. "You must be Mr. Cole," she said softly. Ethan stepped inside, his voice calm but firm. "Yes. And you are?" "My name is Grace Bennett," she replied. "The agency sent me. Mrs. Harris had an emergency and couldn't make it today." Ethan's gaze moved between Grace and Lily. His daughter was relaxed in her arms, eyes half closed, breathing evenly. It was strange. Lily usually took a while to trust. New people, but she seemed perfectly at ease. Ethan folded his arms. "I wasn't informed of any replacement." Grace nodded slowly. "I'm sorry you weren't told. The call came last minute. I arrived about 20 minutes ago. She was crying when I came in, so I picked her up and gave her a bottle. I hope that's all right." Ethan hesitated. His natural instinct was to question everything, especially when it involved his child. He didn't like surprises, and he didn't trust easily. But the way Grace held Lily, it wasn't mechanical. It was full of care, as if every small movement mattered. Still, his voice remained guarded. "You've worked with children before?" Grace's lips curved into a small smile. "Since I was 15, mostly with babies. It's what I've always loved doing." Ethan studied her. She was dressed simply, a cream sweater, dark jeans, and comfortable shoes. Her hair was tied back neatly, and there was a calmness about her that didn't match the stormy weather outside. Lily made a small sound, almost a sigh, and Grace adjusted her gently. Ethan noticed the way she looked at his daughter, as though she were the most important thing in the room. He cleared his throat. "Well, since you're already here, I suppose you can stay, but only for today." Grace nodded, not offended. "Of course." Ethan lingered for another moment, then left the room. But as he walked away, he realized something unusual. Normally, when he left Lily with someone, he felt a weight of worry. Yet now, for reasons he didn't want to admit, that weight felt lighter. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. From his study, Ethan could hear faint laughter from the nursery. Sometimes Grace would talk to Lily in a low, playful voice. Sometimes she would hum again. It wasn't any tune Ethan recognized, but it was gentle and soothing, almost like a breeze on a warm evening. When dinner time came, Grace appeared at the doorway of the study, holding Lily. "She's all ready for her meal," Grace said. "And I think she's starting to like me." Ethan allowed himself a small smile, rare for him. "That seems clear." They went to the kitchen where Ethan prepared Lily's food. Grace stayed beside her high chair, keeping her entertained while Ethan worked. It surprised him how easily she fit into the rhythm of the house, as if she had always been part of it. After dinner, Grace cleaned up without being asked. She placed Lily in her playpen and sat beside her, stacking blocks and making her giggle. Ethan watched for a while from the doorway, unnoticed. He saw something in that moment he hadn't seen in months. His daughter's laughter filling the room, bright and free. When bedtime came, Grace carried Lily upstairs, reading her a short story before placing her in the crib. Ethan stood nearby, listening as Grace's voice softened, every word slow and warm. "She's asleep," Grace whispered, stepping back. Ethan walked over to look at Lily. Her tiny hands curled into fists, her breathing deep and steady. Something about this evening felt different, lighter, less lonely. Back in the hallway, Ethan thanked Grace for coming on such short notice. She only smiled and said, "It was my pleasure. She's a wonderful little girl." Ethan nodded. "I'll decide in the morning if I'll need you again." Grace didn't seem worried. "Whatever you decide, I'm glad I met her." As she left that night, Ethan found himself standing at the window, watching her walk down the driveway. The rain had stopped, and the air felt calm. He didn't know why, but a thought crossed his mind. This might not be the last time he saw Grace Bennett. The next morning, Ethan woke earlier than usual. His habit was to check his phone first, scanning through messages and market updates. But today, his first thought was Lily. He wondered if she had slept well, and strangely, he also wondered if Grace had reached home safely the night before. After showering, Ethan went to the kitchen. Mrs. Harris was already there, arranging breakfast. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and a practical way of speaking. "You came home early yesterday," she remarked, pouring coffee. "And you found my replacement, I assume?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Your replacement?" She said the agency sent her. Mrs. Harris looked puzzled. "I never asked for anyone from the agency. I simply had to leave early for a family emergency. I assumed Lily was alone until you returned." Ethan froze. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "So you don't know her?" Mrs. Harris shook her head. "No. Was she all right?" Ethan remembered the calmness in Grace's eyes, the way Lily had rested against her without fear. "Yes," he said slowly. "She seemed trustworthy." Before he could think more about it, the sound of the doorbell rang. Ethan opened the door, and there stood Grace Bennett, holding a small paper bag. "Good morning," she said, smiling. "I just wanted to bring this for Lily. It's her favorite kind of teething biscuit. I thought she might enjoy it." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "Her favorite? You've only known her for a few hours." Grace laughed softly. "Some things you can tell right away." Mrs. Harris stepped forward, studying Grace closely. "You must be the young lady from yesterday." Grace nodded politely. "Yes. I'm sorry if I overstepped by staying. I heard her crying and couldn't leave her alone." There was a short silence. Mrs. Harris softened her tone. "Well, I suppose I should thank you then." Ethan motioned for Grace to come in. "You're here already, so you might as well stay for the morning." The hours passed easily. Grace didn't act nervous around Ethan's wealth or the size of his home. She carried Lily as if the baby belonged to her own family. When Lily fussed, Grace swayed her gently, whispering something Ethan couldn't quite hear. Ethan watched from a distance, pretending to read a document. There was something different about her, a quiet confidence, a patience that filled the air with peace. He had seen many nannies come and go, each one professional but distant. Grace was different. She looked at Lily not as a job, but as a joy. At one point, Lily dropped her rattle, and Grace crouched to pick it up. "There you go, little star," she murmured. Ethan noticed the nickname and the way Lily responded with a small giggle. When Ethan entered the room. Grace looked up. "She's going to crawl soon. She's already trying to push forward." Ethan nodded. "I've been so busy. I suppose I haven't noticed." Grace didn't judge him. She only smiled. "She's lucky to have you. She just needs someone who can be with her more often." That remark lingered in Ethan's mind for the rest of the morning. Around lunchtime, Mrs. Harris prepared a light meal. Grace stayed beside Lily's high chair, letting her taste small spoonfuls of mashed vegetables. Lily's face scrunched up at the new flavor, and Grace laughed softly. "It's healthy. You'll thank me one day." Ethan found himself watching them again. He wasn't used to laughter in the house. Since his wife's passing, the rooms had felt silent, like a museum where nothing could be touched. Grace's voice seemed to change that. When Lily was done eating, Grace took her to the living room. She placed a blanket on the floor and sat cross-legged, stacking colorful blocks while Lily tried to copy her. They played like that for nearly an hour. Grace making funny little animal sounds, Lily giggling every time. Ethan came in and leaned against the doorway. "She likes you." Grace looked up, her eyes warm. "And I like her." Ethan cleared his throat. "Most children take a while to warm up to strangers." Grace tilted her head. "Maybe she doesn't think I'm a stranger." For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. He simply nodded and went back to his office, though his thoughts stayed in the living room. That afternoon, clouds gathered outside. The rain returned, tapping softly on the windows. Grace moved to the nursery with Lily and began humming again. This time, Ethan stood by the door without entering. The tune was unfamiliar. It wasn't something you'd hear on the radio. It was older, slower, almost like a memory set to music. When she finished, Ethan spoke. "What song is that?" Grace turned, a little surprised to see him. "It's a lullaby my mother used to sing. She told me it was from her own childhood. I'm not even sure where it came from originally." There was a pause before Ethan asked, "Was your mother a nanny too?" Grace shook her head. "No, but she was good at taking care of people. She raised me and my younger brothers after my father passed away." Ethan stepped into the room. "That must have been difficult." Grace's smile was small but steady. "It was, but it also taught me how to love without conditions." Ethan didn't reply right away. His eyes went to Lily, now asleep in her crib. He thought of his late wife, the hospital room, the sudden silence that had followed. He had built walls since then, not just around his heart, but around his entire life. Looking at Grace now, he felt one of those walls shift, even if only slightly. Evening came quickly. Mrs. Harris packed her things and left for the day, leaving Ethan alone with Grace and Lily. They shared a quiet dinner, Ethan at the head of the table, Grace feeding Lily between her own bites. When it was time for Grace to leave, she gathered her things but hesitated at the door. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I know you probably have other people in mind for this job, but if you need me again, I'm happy to help." Ethan met her gaze. For a moment, he almost said yes right away. But instead, he said, "I'll think about it." Grace smiled, not offended. "Good night, then." After she left, Ethan walked through the silent house. The sound of her lullaby still echoed faintly in his mind, mingling with Lily's laughter from earlier. He had told himself Grace was just a temporary help. But deep down, he already knew. Something about her was not temporary at all. The next 2 days passed quietly, but Ethan found himself thinking about Grace more often than he expected. He told himself it was because she had a natural way with Lily, and good childcare was rare. But deep down, he knew there was more to it. Something about her felt unfinished, like a story he had only read the first page of. On the third morning, he was in his study when Mrs. Harris entered, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I have to be away again. Today. My sister's not well. I've already spoken to Grace Bennett. She said she can come over if you approve. Ethan raised his eyebrows. You spoke to her directly? Mrs. Harris nodded. She left her number when she came that first day. I called her this morning. For a moment, Ethan almost smiled. It seemed Grace had planned ahead without even asking him. Tell her she can come, he said simply. An hour later, the doorbell rang. When Ethan opened it, Grace stood there with the same calm smile. She carried a cloth bag filled with small toys and picture books. Good morning, she said. I thought Lily might like some new stories. Ethan let her in, and within minutes, she was sitting on the nursery floor with Lily, reading aloud. Lily leaned against her, eyes wide at the colorful pictures. From his study, Ethan could hear their voices. Grace didn't just read the words. She added little sounds, changing her tone for each character, making Lily laugh. After lunch, the rain began again. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the house felt extra quiet. Ethan wandered into the nursery, where Grace was humming that same lullaby. Lily was drifting to sleep in her arms. That song again? Ethan said softly. Grace looked up. It seems to help her relax. Ethan leaned against the doorway. You must have sung it to many children. Grace hesitated, then shook her head. Not really. Only to people I felt close to. Her words caught Ethan off guard. Close? He repeated. Grace smiled faintly. Some songs are not just songs. They carry memories, feelings. My mother used to sing it when we had no electricity, and the nights felt endless. It made me feel safe. Ethan stepped further into the room. You said before you took care of your younger brothers. Was that after your father passed? Grace nodded, her voice quieter now. Yes, I was 15. My father had been ill for a long time. When he was gone, my mother worked long hours, and I became the one who kept the house running. Cooking, cleaning, helping with homework, rocking my baby brother to sleep when my mother was too tired. Ethan imagined a teenage girl carrying all that responsibility. That must have been hard. Grace looked down at Lily, her expression soft. It was. But it taught me that caring for someone changes you. You start to see the world differently. You stop thinking only about yourself. Her words echoed in Ethan's mind. He thought of the months after his wife's passing, how he had buried himself in work, believing it was the only way to cope. He had provided for Lily in every material way, but had he truly been present? That afternoon, Ethan found himself joining Grace and Lily on the floor. It felt strange at first, a billionaire sitting on the carpet with building blocks, but Lily's laughter made it impossible to stay in the corner. Grace glanced at him. You're a natural, you know. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I don't think anyone's ever called me that. She chuckled. You just need more practice. They built a small tower together, Lily knocking it over every time. Grace laughed, so freely that Ethan felt the corners of his own mouth lifting without thinking. When Lily finally grew tired, Grace carried her upstairs for a nap. Ethan followed, leaning on the doorframe as Grace settled her into the crib. She adjusted the blanket with gentle hands, humming once more. You're very patient, Ethan said quietly. Grace looked up. Patience is easy when you care. Later, in the day, as the rain slowed, Grace offered to prepare a simple snack for them all. Ethan was surprised at how natural it felt to sit at the kitchen island while she moved around, slicing fruit and arranging it neatly on a plate. You seem comfortable here, Ethan remarked. Grace smiled. Some houses are cold, even if they're beautiful. Yours isn't. It just needs more life in it. Her comment made him pause. He realized she wasn't talking about furniture or decoration. She meant the sound of people, laughter, warmth, things the house had been missing for a long time. They ate together, the conversation light at first. But soon, Ethan asked the question that had been on his mind since the first day. Grace, how did you really end up here that day? She placed her fork down and took a breath. I was visiting a friend who lives 2 streets away. I was walking past your house when I heard crying. I rang the bell, but no one answered. The door wasn't fully shut, so I stepped in. I found Lily alone in the nursery. I didn't plan to stay, but I couldn't leave her like that. Ethan listened carefully. And when I came home, you told me the agency sent you. Grace nodded. I didn't want you to think I was some stranger who just walked in. I thought you might call the police. Ethan studied her face. There was no fear in her expression, only honesty. Most people wouldn't have done what you did, he said finally. Grace's voice was steady. Maybe not, but I've learned that if you can help, you should. By the time Mrs. Harris returned in the evening, Ethan had already decided he wanted Grace back. But he didn't say it directly. Instead, he simply told her, "If you're free tomorrow, come by." Grace smiled. "I'll be here." That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat in his study with the lights low. He thought about Grace's story, her calm strength, and the way she had stepped into his life without warning. It occurred to him that perhaps she wasn't just helping Lily. Perhaps she was helping him too, though he wasn't ready to admit it aloud. The next day began with clear skies, but by late afternoon, dark clouds rolled in. The wind grew stronger, and the sound of branches tapping against the windows filled the house. Grace had arrived early that morning, carrying a warm smile and a small basket of fresh bread she had baked herself. Lily had clapped her little hands the moment she saw her. Ethan noticed how easily his daughter reacted to Grace now, as if she had been part of her life forever. They spent the afternoon in the living room. Grace read picture books while Ethan answered a few business emails nearby. Lily sat on Grace's lap, pointing at the colorful illustrations and babbling happily, but then the first flash of lightning lit up the windows, followed by a deep rumble of thunder. Lily flinched, and her small face began to crumple. Grace held her closer. "It's all right, little star," she whispered. "The sky is just making music." Ethan set his laptop aside and walked over. "She's afraid of storms." Grace looked at him gently. "Then we'll make her feel safe." An hour later, the storm grew worse. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, and the wind whistled through the edges of the old windows. Ethan had just gone to the kitchen for tea when suddenly the lights flickered, then went out completely. The house fell into darkness. He returned to the living room to find Grace sitting calmly with Lily, holding her close. She had already lit a small candle from her bag, something she said she always carried for emergencies. The warm glow lit her face softly, and Ethan was struck by how composed she seemed. "Do you always carry candles?" he asked. She smiled, faintly. "When you've lived through enough power cuts, it becomes a habit." Ethan sat down across from her. "Where did you grow up?" "In a small town," she replied. "We didn't have much. Sometimes we'd go days without electricity after a storm. My mother used to tell us stories until we forgot we were afraid of the dark." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "What kind of stories?" Grace's eyes softened. "One's about courage, about finding light even when everything feels dark." Lily had grown quiet now, her head resting against Grace's shoulder. The flicker of the candle made the room feel smaller, warmer, almost like the storm outside was part of a different world. Ethan poured tea for both of them, placing one cup in front of her. "You seem very calm in situations like this," he said. Grace looked at him over the candlelight. "I've learned that fear grows if you feed it, but if you focus on something safe, a voice, a touch, a story, it shrinks." Her words made Ethan think of his own nights after losing his wife, the empty rooms, the silence that seemed to echo. Maybe he had been feeding his own fear without realizing it. "Tell me one of those stories," he said suddenly. Grace tilted, her head. "Now? Yes. If it helped you as a child, Maybe it will help Lily now. She smiled softly and began. There was once a little bird who loved the morning sun. But one day a storm came and covered the sky in clouds. The little bird couldn't see the sun anymore, and she was afraid she would never find it again. She hid in her nest, shivering. But then she heard the voice of an older bird who told her, "The sun is always there. The clouds can't take it away. You just have to wait for the wind to clear them." So the little bird stayed warm, trusting that the sun would return. And when the storm finally passed, she saw the light shining brighter than before. Her voice was steady, almost like a lullaby. Ethan realized it wasn't just Lily she was speaking to, it was him too. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the rain. Lily was asleep now, her breathing even. Grace adjusted the blanket around her and looked at Ethan. "You've been through your own storms, haven't you?" she asked gently. Ethan hesitated, his usual guardedness returning. "Everyone has." Grace didn't push. She simply said, "Some storms take longer to pass, but they always do." Her understanding unsettled him in a strange way. Very few people spoke to him without expectation or judgment. When the lights finally flickered back on an hour later, Ethan almost wished they hadn't. The warm cocoon of the candlelight was gone, replaced by the bright overhead bulbs. Later, that evening after Lily was tucked into bed, Ethan walked Grace to the front door. The storm had quieted to a gentle drizzle, and the air smelled fresh. "Thank you," he said, surprising himself. "For what?" she asked. "For today. For keeping things calm." Grace smiled. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Ethan replied. "Most people would have panicked in the dark. You made it feel safe." She gave him a small nod. "Sometimes all someone needs is to know they're not alone." Ethan didn't respond right away. He just held her gaze for a moment before stepping back. "I'll see you tomorrow?" "Yes," she said softly. "Tomorrow." That night, as Ethan sat in his study, he realized something unexpected. Grace had not only comforted Lily during the storm, she had made him feel calmer too. Her presence was like that candlelight, warm and steady, refusing to be shaken by the wind. He didn't know how long she would stay in their lives, but for the first time in a long time, he found himself hoping she wouldn't leave anytime soon. The morning after the storm was bright and clear, as if nothing unusual had happened. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Cole mansion, painting golden patterns on the floor. Grace arrived early, carrying a small jar of homemade apple puree for Lily. The baby reached out for her the moment she stepped in, laughing in that innocent way that made Ethan's chest feel lighter. The day began quietly. Lily was cheerful, and the air in the house felt warm. Ethan found himself in the living room with his laptop, pretending to work while he listened to Grace singing softly to Lily. Every now and then, he caught himself smiling, but in the middle of the afternoon, the phone on the side table rang. Ethan glanced at the caller ID. It was the child care agency he had used when Lily was first born. He picked up. "Ethan Cole speaking," a polite female voice answered. "Mr. Cole, this is Angela from Bright Care Agency. I just wanted to confirm your request for a temporary replacement for Mrs. Harris last week." Ethan frowned. "I didn't request a replacement. Mrs. Harris said the agency sent someone." There was a pause. "We have no record of sending anyone to your home in the past month." Ethan's fingers tightened on the phone. "Are you sure?" "Yes," the woman replied. "The last caregiver we sent was over 6 months ago. If you've had someone else looking after your daughter, they didn't come through us." Ethan thanked her and ended the call, but his mind was already racing. He found Grace in the nursery, sitting on the rug while Lily played with a stack of rings. Grace looked up and smiled. "She's trying to put them in the right order now, very determined." Ethan's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Grace, Can we talk for a moment?" Her smile faded slightly, but she nodded. "Of course." He waited until Lily was busy with her toy before speaking. "I just got off the phone with the agency. They say they never sent you." Grace's hands stilled on her lap. "I see." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You told me the first day that they did." She took a slow breath. "I did. And I'm sorry. I didn't know how else to explain why I was here without sounding suspicious." "Then explain now," Ethan said evenly. Grace met his gaze without fear. "That day, I was visiting a friend nearby. I heard Lily crying when I walked past your house. I rang the doorbell. No one answered. The front door wasn't fully closed, so I stepped in. I followed the sound to her room. She was alone, crying so hard her face was red. I couldn't leave her like that. When you came home, I panicked and said I was sent by the agency. I thought you'd believe me more easily that way." Ethan studied her face. She didn't look like someone lying to hide bad intentions. She looked like someone telling the truth because there was no other choice. Still, his protective instinct made him wary. "You understand how this looks," he said quietly. "Yes," Grace replied, "and I accept whatever you decide. But please, believe me when I say I stayed for her, only for her." There was a heavy silence. Ethan glanced at Lily, who was now crawling toward Grace, as if she could sense the tension. Grace picked her up and held her close, her expression softening immediately. Ethan felt a strange pull inside him. He didn't want to doubt Grace. She had been nothing but kind and attentive since the moment she walked in. Lily trusted her completely, and Lily rarely trusted strangers. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I should ask you to leave." Grace nodded once, but she didn't put Lily down. "If that's what you decide, I'll go. But I hope you'll remember that sometimes the right thing doesn't always happen in the right way." The rest of the afternoon was quieter than usual. Grace didn't hum or tell stories. Ethan worked in his study, though his thoughts kept drifting back to the nursery. He remembered the storm, the candlelight, the way she had calmed Lily and him. When the clock struck 6, Grace came to the study door, holding Lily, who was now dressed in her soft evening pajamas. "I've fed her, and she's ready for bed," she said. Ethan stood, taking Lily in his arms. "Thank you." Grace gave him a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll head out now." She turned to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped her. "Grace," she paused. "I'm not asking you to go. Not yet." Grace turned back, surprise flickering across her face. "You're not?" "No," Ethan said. "Until I know more, I want you here, but I also want the truth. Always." Grace nodded slowly. "You'll have it." That night, after Grace had gone, Ethan sat in the quiet nursery. Lily was asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling. He thought about the phone call, about the way Grace had answered without hesitation, about the sadness in her voice when she thought she might have to leave. He didn't know if trusting her was the right choice, but he knew that losing her suddenly would be harder on Lily than on him. Somewhere deep inside, he also knew it would be harder on him than he wanted to admit. The next morning, Ethan found himself awake before the sun. He couldn't shake the conversation from the day before. The sound of Grace's calm voice telling him she stayed only for her echoed in his head. By the time she arrived, carrying a small cloth bag with Lily's favorite snacks, Ethan had decided he needed answers. Not half-truths, not gentle hints, but the whole story. Grace greeted him as usual, her smile warm but a little cautious. She knew the trust between them was still fragile. Lily, however, had no such hesitation. She reached out for Grace the instant she saw her. Giggling as she was lifted into her arms, Ethan watched them for a moment before saying, "After Lily's nap today, I'd like to talk." Grace nodded once. I understand. The morning passed quietly. Grace read to Lily in the nursery, sang softly while feeding her, and even made her laugh so hard she clapped her tiny hands in delight. Ethan observed from the doorway more than once, wondering how someone could step into their lives so unexpectedly and yet feel as if they belonged. When Lily finally went down for her nap, Ethan joined Grace at the kitchen table. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting gentle patterns on the wooden surface between them. "Tell me everything," Ethan said. His voice was calm, but there was no room for hesitation. Grace folded her hands and took a deep breath. "All right, I'll start from the beginning." She told him about growing up in a small town with two younger brothers. Her father had been ill for years, and when he passed away, her mother took multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. "I became the caretaker," Grace said softly. "I learned how to cook, how to change diapers, how to help with schoolwork. I was still a child myself, but I didn't have the choice to stay one." Ethan listened without interrupting. "By the time I was 18, my mother's health began to fail. I took on even more work, babysitting, cleaning houses, working at a daycare, anything to help pay the bills. When my mother passed away, I was 21. My brothers were still in school, and I promised her I'd keep them together. That's what I've been doing ever since." Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see the weight of her memories in her eyes. "That day I found Lily." Grace paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "I was visiting a friend who had moved into this neighborhood. We hadn't seen each other in years. I was walking to her house when I heard crying. It wasn't the kind of cry you hear for a moment. It was the kind that pulls you in. I followed the sound to your door." She looked at Ethan directly. The door was ajar. I hesitated, but then I thought, what if something had happened to the person taking care of her? I stepped inside. I found her alone in the nursery, red-faced and shaking from crying. I couldn't leave, so I picked her up. I stayed until you came home. When I saw the look on your face, I panicked. I told you I was sent by the agency because I thought you'd believe that more than the truth." Ethan was silent for a long moment. Grace's hands tightened slightly in her lap. "I know I should have told you the truth from the start, but I don't regret staying. Not for a second." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind replaying everything. The first moment he saw her holding Lily, the storm night when she made them feel safe, the way Lily's face lit up every time she walked into the room. "You understand," he said slowly. "I can't just let anyone into my home, into my daughter's life." "I do," Grace replied softly. "But I'm not just anyone." Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a brief second, the guarded expression he always wore seemed to fade. That afternoon, something shifted between them when Lily woke from her nap. Ethan stayed in the nursery while Grace played with her. They built towers of blocks, knocked them over, and laughed together. For the first time, Ethan joined without feeling like an outsider to their bond. At one point, Lily crawled into his lap, holding a block in one hand and reaching toward Grace with the other. Grace smiled. "She wants both of us to play." So, they did, all three of them, sitting on the floor while the afternoon sun poured through the window. Later, as Grace packed her bag to leave, Ethan walked her to the door. "Grace," he said quietly, "I believe you." Her eyes widened slightly. "You do?" "Yes, but belief comes with responsibility. If you're going to stay in Lily's life, I expect honesty. Always." "You have my word," Grace replied without hesitation. Ethan studied her for a moment longer. "And I expect you to tell me if you ever need help. Taking care of others doesn't mean you shouldn't let someone take care of you, too." Grace's smile this time was genuine, without any shadow of caution. Noted. She stepped out into the late afternoon light, and Ethan watched her walk down the driveway. For the first time since his wife's passing, he felt something other than loss or duty. It was small, quiet, but it was there. It was hope. The next week felt different in the Cole household. The air seemed lighter, and the rooms that once carried a quiet loneliness now held the gentle sounds of Lily's laughter and Grace's soft voice telling stories or singing songs. Ethan noticed, himself lingering at home more often, taking short breaks from work just to watch them together. One crisp morning, Ethan stood by the kitchen window with his coffee, watching Grace push Lily in her stroller across the garden path. The autumn leaves crunched under her shoes, and Lily squealed in delight every time Grace pointed to a bird or a bright red leaf drifting to the ground. Ethan's thoughts wandered. He had built his fortune through hard work and precision, always, keeping his emotions tightly guarded. But no business achievement had ever brought him the quiet sense of peace he was feeling now. It wasn't about numbers or success. It was about trust, and the way Grace had earned it without asking for anything in return. That evening, Ethan decided it was time to make things official. When Grace arrived the next morning, he asked her to join him in the living room once. Lily was down for her nap. "I have something I'd like to discuss," he said. Grace set down her bag and sat across from him, her expression calm but curious. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened," Ethan began. "About how you came into our lives in such an unexpected way. I won't pretend I wasn't cautious. I was. But over these weeks I've seen something rare in you, Grace." She tilted her head slightly. "And what is that?" "Genuine care," Ethan replied simply. "Not just for Lily, but for people. For me. Even when you didn't have to. You've given this house more warmth than it's had in a long time. So I'd like to offer you the position officially. As Lily's full-time nanny. No more uncertainty. You'd have a fair salary, your own room here if you ever need it, and the freedom to make this a home for her in ways I can't always manage alone." Grace was quiet for a moment. Her eyes softened, and she smiled faintly. "Are you sure? Ethan? You don't have to do this out of gratitude." "This isn't about gratitude," he said firmly. "It's about trust and family." Grace accepted. And from that day forward, her presence became part of the rhythm of their lives. They developed small routines that made each day feel full. In the mornings, Grace would sit Lily in the high chair while she prepared breakfast, humming softly. Ethan would join them with his coffee, sometimes helping Grace feed Lily just so he could be part of the moment. In the afternoons, Ethan began taking short walks with them in the garden. Lily would reach out her tiny hands toward him, and Grace would smile whenever he carried her on his shoulders, making her giggle. Evenings were the most precious. Grace would settle Lily into her crib and tell her a bedtime story, her voice low and steady. Sometimes Ethan would listen from the doorway, the warmth of the scene washing over him. One evening, a few weeks later, Ethan returned home earlier than usual. As he stepped through the front door, he heard music coming from the living room. He paused, listening. Grace was teaching Lily to clap along to the rhythm, her laughter ringing through the room. When Grace noticed him, she looked up with a smile. "We were having a little music lesson." Ethan sat down beside them on the floor. "I can see that. May I join?" The three of them spent the next half hour singing children's songs, clapping and laughing together. It was such a simple thing, yet it felt like something important, a memory being built. As winter approached, the garden lost its bright colors, but the warmth inside the house only grew. Grace decorated a small corner of the living room with handmade ornaments, some crafted from paper and ribbon. She encouraged Ethan to help Lily make tiny handprint art, which they placed in a frame on the mantel. Ethan realized one evening, as he stood looking at the framed handprints, that he hadn't thought about the loneliness of his home in weeks. Grace's presence had changed everything. On a quiet Sunday afternoon while Lily napped, Ethan found Grace in the kitchen making tea. "I wanted to thank you," he said. She looked up. For what? For bringing life back into this house, Ethan replied. You've given Lily love and joy, and you've reminded me what those things feel like. Grace's voice was gentle. You've given me something too, Ethan. A place to belong. A family. In a way I didn't expect. They shared a quiet smile, one that didn't need words to explain. Months later, Lily's first birthday arrived. The house was filled with balloons, soft music, and the smell of freshly baked cake. Friends, neighbors, and a few of Ethan's closest colleagues came to celebrate. But Ethan's eyes kept drifting toward the sight of Grace carrying Lily, showing her the decorations. When it was time for the cake, Grace set Lily in her high chair, helping her blow out the single candle. The room erupted in cheers, and Lily clapped her tiny hands. Ethan felt a deep, grounding happiness in that moment, one he hadn't known he was missing. That night, after the guests had gone and Lily was asleep, Ethan found Grace in the kitchen, cleaning up. You've done so much for us, he said. And I want you to know, Grace, you're not just Lily's nanny. You're part of this family now, no matter what. Grace's eyes glistened slightly. Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know. And with that, the unexpected chapter that began the day Ethan walked into the nursery to find a stranger. Holding his baby had become something entirely different. It was no longer about suspicion or uncertainty. It was about trust, kindness, and the quiet strength that builds a family. For Ethan and Lily, Grace wasn't just the woman who fed the baby that day. She was the one who stayed and changed everything.